Ben's day started like any other. A brisk jog through the park, coffee brewing in the kitchen, and the soft sound of Olivia humming as she prepared breakfast. They had built their life together over 15 years, but lately, something had shifted. He couldn't put his finger on it. Until a seemingly innocuous notification popped up on his phone. The monthly credit card statement. It wasn't the numbers that caught his attention, but the line item, the Crystal Pines Hotel. "Olivia, what's this charge?" he asked, trying to sound casual as he held up his phone. "Oh, that?" Olivia laughed, her expression perfectly nonchalant. "It's just a billing error. I'll call them and sort it out." Her tone was breezy, dismissive even, but Ben's instincts told him otherwise. A billing error? Twice? His eyes flicked to her as she casually flipped pancakes, her usual poise intact. Yet there was a flicker in her gaze, a momentary hesitation before she returned to her sunny demeanor. The kind he had learned to notice after years of negotiating deals in his profession. He tried to let it go. He told himself that he was being paranoid, that the woman he loved wouldn't hide something from him. But when Olivia left for her yoga class that evening, Ben found himself scrolling back through their shared account history. The hotel charges weren't isolated. They had appeared sporadically over the past 3 months. Always a knot began to form in his stomach, each scroll tightening it further. He wasn't a man given to suspicion. Trust had been the cornerstone of their marriage, but this was different. It wasn't just the hotel charges, it was the missed dinners, the guarded phone calls, and the way she now looked at him, like he was part of the furniture in their once vibrant home. He decided to confront her again that night. "Olivia," he said, keeping his voice steady as they settled into the living room. "About that hotel charge." Her eyes darted up, a flicker of something. Annoyance? Panic? "Ben, we've already been over this. I told you it was a mistake." But this time, she didn't meet his gaze. "Then why haven't you called to fix it?" he pressed, his voice firmer now. "If it's just a mistake, it should be easy to clear up." She sighed, leaning back into the couch cushions, and gave him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I will, okay? You don't need to stress about it." That night, as Olivia slept peacefully beside him, Ben lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed the inconsistencies, the cracks in her story. He decided he couldn't let it rest. By the next morning, he was making plans, not to accuse her, not yet, but to find out the truth. After all, a billing error didn't smell like perfume on a collar. The nagging feeling in Ben's gut refused to go away. His life, once an orderly routine, was now colored with doubt and suspicion. He needed answers, not half-truths wrapped in Olivia's carefully constructed charm. So, when she left for her weekly Pilates session that Saturday morning, he grabbed his laptop and got to work. He started with the hotel, the Crystal Pines, a boutique establishment on the edge of the city known for its discreet ambience. Its name alone left an acrid taste in his mouth. A quick online search revealed its popularity for romantic weekend getaways, exactly the kind of place he and Olivia hadn't visited in years. His pulse quickened as he clicked through images of the rooms. Lavish suites with silk linens and champagne service. The first step was verifying the charges. He opened their joint credit card statement and noted the dates. A pattern emerged. Saturday mornings, always coinciding with Olivia's supposed work events or brunches with friends. He called the hotel under the guise of verifying a charge for a recent stay. After being transferred to the billing department, the receptionist's cheery voice confirmed that yes, a reservation for Olivia Warren was made on those dates. Ben's throat tightened. There was no billing error. She had lied, but who was she meeting? The question burned like a brand in his mind. His wife's life, when he thought he knew inside and out, now felt like a locked room filled with secrets. He scrolled through her Instagram, her posts carefully curated to show picturesque meals, work achievements, and girls' nights. Nothing unusual. But then there was her phone. That evening, while Olivia showered, Ben made a choice that felt both invasive and necessary. He unlocked her phone. He'd guessed her password years ago, but had never felt the need to use it. Now, it felt like a life. Her text messages were clean, almost too clean. A second messaging app, tucked in a folder labeled Utilities, caught his eye. It was one he didn't recognize, a platform designed for encrypted chats. Anxiety gnawed at him as he opened it. That's where he found Daniel. The conversations were casual at first glance, jokes about bad coffee, complaints about work. But as Ben scrolled up, his stomach turned. The tone shifted, inside jokes became flirtation, which gave way to outright intimacy. They exchanged messages about meetings at the Crystal Pines. each one filled with a familiarity and longing that made Ben's chest ache. Daniel was confident, even cavalier. "Room 204 again next week," one message read. Olivia's reply made his vision blur with anger. "Of course. Can't wait to see you, love." Ben felt like a man watching his house burn while holding the match. His instincts had been right all along, but the confirmation brought no relief. He clicked on Daniel's profile picture, a man in his early 40s, tanned with an easy smile. The kind of man Ben used to think Olivia would never glance at twice. He took screenshots of everything. Evidence, he told himself. He needed undeniable proof for when the time came to confront her. But confrontation wasn't enough. Olivia had taken their life, their marriage, and turned it into a stage for her lies. He wasn't just going to accuse her, he was going to expose her. The next step was ensuring he wouldn't be blindsided. He downloaded a GPS tracking app onto Olivia's phone that synced to his. Then he researched the Crystal Hines security measures. That evening, Olivia returned from Pilates glowing and chatty. She kissed him on the cheek, asked about his day, and laughed at his jokes like nothing was wrong. Ben played along, nodding and smiling, even as his mind churned with plans. He couldn't confront her yet, not until he saw it for himself. As he lay in bed that night, Olivia sleeping soundly beside him, he stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dark, "Not much longer." The truth was unraveling, thread by thread, and Ben was ready to follow it to the end. Ben woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The previous night's discovery had left him raw with pain, but it also solidified his resolve. He wasn't just going to confront Olivia about her betrayal. That would be too simple, too easy for her to dismiss with more lies and feigned remorse. No, Ben was going to make sure her deceit was laid bare, leaving no room for excuses. He spent the morning creating his plan. It wasn't impulsive. Every step needed to be calculated, precise. First, he scoured through his collection of screenshots, ensuring he had enough evidence. Texts, time-stamped hotel bookings, even photos Daniel had sent Olivia during their rendezvous. All of it was saved and backed up on a secure drive. This wasn't just for his confrontation, it was insurance for the fallout. Next, Ben considered the venue. The Crystal Pines was too predictable now. Olivia would be wary if he suddenly appeared there. But her texts with Daniel provided him with a critical clue. Their next meeting was scheduled for a new location, the Garden Crest Hotel, a luxury spot in the heart of the city. The change in venue felt deliberate. Perhaps Olivia thought it would throw him off. If so, she underestimated him. To ensure he wasn't caught off guard, Ben visited the Garden Crest under the guise of scoping it out for a future stay. His cover story was simple. He was planning a romantic weekend getaway for his wife. The concierge was all too eager to provide a tour, showing him the upscale amenities and private event spaces. Ben paid particular attention to the layout, memorizing the exits, the placement of the lobby, and the discreet paths leading to the rooms. He needed to know exactly where to position himself when the moment came. A plan began to form. Ben would wait for Olivia and Daniel at the hotel's bar, blending into the upscale crowd with ease. He envisioned it clearly. Olivia walking in, confident and radiant, Daniel by her side. They'd think they were untouchable, their secret perfectly preserved. And then, Ben would make his move. The thought of a direct confrontation thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. But he wasn't done planning yet. This wasn't just about catching them in the act. It was about ensuring their betrayal was exposed to the people who mattered. That evening, while Olivia was out working late, he sent a message to a close mutual friend, Melissa, under the pretense of organizing a surprise dinner for Olivia. "Can you make it to the Garden Crest Hotel this Friday around 7, he wrote. "I want to make it special and I need a little help pulling it off." Melissa, ever the enthusiastic socialite, agreed instantly and even offered to bring a few other friends to help with the surprise. Ben smirked as he read her reply. The audience was forming, and soon Olivia's perfect facade would shatter in front of the very people who had always admired her. The days leading up to Friday dragged on with agonizing slowness. Olivia, unaware of the storm brewing, carried on as if nothing had changed. She continued texting Daniel, unaware that Ben had synced her phone to his through a tracker. Every message she sent only fueled his determination. Friday finally arrived. Ben dressed with care, choosing a crisp navy suit that Olivia had once said made him look irresistible. He wanted to look his best, not for her, but for himself. Tonight was about reclaiming his dignity. By 6:30 p.m., Ben was seated at the bar in the Garden Crest, a glass of whiskey in hand. He had chosen a strategic spot with a clear view of the entrance and the private dining area where Olivia and Daniel had reserved a table. Melissa and the others, unaware of the true nature of the evening, arrived shortly after, taking their seats at a nearby table. Ben greeted them warmly, masking the tension simmering beneath his calm exterior. Melissa smiled, then looked away. "Damn, I do like you," Ben said, stepping forward, standing on the porch and holding up bright blue glyphs. "Ben!" he called out, pointing to the ground directly below him. At precisely 7:05 p.m., Olivia walked in. She was wearing a dress he didn't recognize, sleek, black, and undeniably expensive. Her hair was styled to perfection, and her smile was dazzling as she laughed at something Daniel whispered in her ear. Ben's grip tightened on his glass. There she was, the woman who had shared his bed, his life, now parading her betrayal in front of him. He waited until they were seated before making his move. He stood, the weight of the evidence in his pocket grounding him. His heart pounded, but his steps were steady as he approached their table. Melissa's laughter faltered as she spotted him, her eyes darting between Ben and Olivia in confusion. "Evening, Olivia," Ben said, his voice steady but cold. Olivia's head snapped up, her smile vanishing. Daniel froze, his confident smirk replaced by unease. Olivia's voice was a whisper, her eyes wide with shock. "The prize," he said, pulling out his phone. The gallery of screenshots was already open, ready to be displayed. "I thought it was time we had a little honesty in this marriage." The gasps from the surrounding tables were exactly what he had anticipated. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth, and Daniel looked as if he wanted to sink into the floor. Ben felt a grim satisfaction as Olivia stammered, her carefully constructed world unraveling in front of their friends. "This," Ben said, holding up the phone, "is what you've been doing while I trusted you." The room fell silent. Ben let the moment stretch, ensuring that Olivia and Daniel felt the full weight of the public humiliation. Tonight, the truth was no longer hidden. Ben was finally free. Ben's words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. The quiet murmur of the hotel's dining area had dissolved into stunned silence as heads turned toward the table where Olivia and Daniel sat. Olivia's eyes widened, her perfectly painted smile now replaced by sheer panic. Daniel, caught completely off guard, fumbled with his napkin, avoiding Ben's piercing glare. Again, Olivia began, her voice trembling. "This isn't what it looks like." Ben let out a bitter laugh, holding up his phone so the incriminating screenshots were visible to anyone nearby. "Oh, really? Because it looks exactly like what it is. A betrayal." The patrons in the dining area were no longer pretending to mind their own business. Several phones discreetly emerged from pockets and purses, capturing snippets of the escalating drama. Melissa, still seated at her table nearby, whispered something to the friend beside her, her face frozen in shock. Ben could see her piecing together the reason she'd been invited here tonight. Daniel finally found his voice, though it cracked under the weight of his guilt. "Look, Ben, let's not do this here. We can talk like adults, privately." Ben turned to him, his voice sharp and cutting. "You mean like the way you privately crept into my marriage?" "No, Daniel, we're doing this here. The truth deserves an audience." Olivia reached for Ben's hand, her own trembling. "Ben, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "This doesn't have to get ugly." Ben recoiled as though her touch burned. "Ugly?" His voice rose, catching the attention of a waiter trying to approach with a tray of drinks. The young man hesitated, retreating toward the bar. "What's ugly, Olivia, is what you've done. What's ugly is watching you smile at me every morning, knowing you've been sneaking off to meet him." He gestured toward Daniel, whose face was now a deep shade of red. "You both thought you could hide this, didn't you? That I'd never figure it out. You were wrong." Olivia's calm facade began to crumble. "It's not like that," she insisted, her voice rising in desperation. "It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything." Ben's laugh was hollow, cutting through the room. "Nothing? So, sneaking off to hotels, exchanging intimate messages, lying to my face, that's nothing?" He turned to the onlookers, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems I've been worried over nothing. Let's all forget about this little misunderstanding." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one looked away. This wasn't just drama. It was a spectacle, the kind of scandal that would be whispered about for weeks. Daniel, desperate to salvage what little dignity he had left, rose from his seat. "Enough," he said firmly, though his voice wavered. "You've made your point, Ben. Now let's all go home and talk this." Ben stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Go home?" he hissed. "You think you can lecture me about going home when you've been the one defiling mine?" "No, Daniel." You don't get to dictate how this ends. And Melissa, unable to stay silent any longer, stood up from her table. Olivia, she said, her voice laced with disappointment, is this true? You've been cheating on Ben? Olivia's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her silence was damning, and the weight of her guilt seemed to press her deeper into her chair. Melissa shook her head, her expression a mix of disbelief and betrayal. How could you? Ben has always been good to you. Ben's jaw tightened as he looked at Melissa. Thank you for confirming that, Melissa. I appreciate knowing someone else saw the truth before I had to force it out into the open. Olivia's composure broke entirely, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Ben, she sobbed. I never wanted to hurt you. Ben's voice softened, but his words were no less firm. You didn't just hurt me, Olivia. You destroyed everything we built together. And for what? For him? Daniel flinched as Ben pointed directly at him. The man who thought it was a good idea to betray his own friends. Olivia buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled by her fingers. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the exits, clearly wishing he could disappear. The onlookers were whispering now, murmuring their judgments, their sympathy for Ben, their disgust at the betrayal playing out before them. Ben reached into his pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. He tossed it onto the table between Olivia and Daniel. Inside are copies of all your messages and photos. I've already sent them to my lawyer. By Monday, the divorce papers will be on your desk, Olivia. Olivia's sobs turned into gasps. Divorce? Ben, please, don't do this. I can change. We can fix this. But Ben shook his head. The time for fixing this was before you decided to let someone else into our marriage. It's too late now. He turned on his heel, leaving Olivia to crumble under the weight of her tears and Daniel to face the humiliation of the crowd. As Ben walked out of the dining area, a hush fell over the room. He felt the weight of their stares, but didn't care. For the first time in weeks, his steps felt steady, his purpose clear. As he reached the exit, he stopped and glanced back briefly. Olivia and Daniel sat frozen, their perfect illusion shattered for all to see. It wasn't justice, not entirely, but it was a start. Ben stepped into the cool night air, breathing deeply. The confrontation was over, but his journey was just beginning. The ride home felt surreal. Ben's heart raced. But for the first time in weeks, it wasn't from suspicion or anger. It was from clarity. The confrontation was over. The truth, ugly and painful, had been exposed. Now, it was time to pick up the pieces. By the time Ben stepped through his front door, the silence of the house felt heavier than before. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the kind that lingers after a storm. Olivia hadn't come home. He suspected she wouldn't for a while, at least not willingly. He poured himself a drink and sat at the dining table, the one where they had shared so many meals, now a symbol of the life that had unraveled. The fallout began the next morning. His phone buzzed incessantly, texts from friends, concerned calls from family, and messages from mutual acquaintances who had heard about the confrontation. Melissa had already spread the story. By midday, Olivia's betrayal was no longer a secret. Some messages offered support. I'm so sorry, Ben. If you need anything, we're here for you. Others were less sympathetic. I can't believe Olivia would do that. I guess you never really know. Ben ignored most of them. He wasn't ready to face the world yet. His focus now was on reclaiming his life. On Monday, he met with his lawyer. The manila envelope he'd left with Olivia and Daniel was only a preview of the evidence he presented in the meeting. The lawyer nodded as Ben explained everything. Hotel charges, texts, the confrontation at the Garden Crest. By the time they were done, the divorce papers were drafted, ready to be served. Ben felt a small but satisfying sense of control. Meanwhile, Olivia's world was crumbling. Friends who had once admired her for her charm and elegance now saw her in a different light. Melissa, once her closest confidant, had cut ties entirely. The whispers at work grew louder, the judgment harder to escape. Daniel, too, wasn't spared. His colleagues avoided him, and rumors of his involvement in the scandal began circulating. Ben, however, chose not to revel in their misery. He wasn't a man who thrived on vengeance, despite the public confrontation. He wanted closure, not chaos. Yet, he couldn't help but feel vindicated when he heard through the grapevine that Olivia and Daniel had stopped seeing each other. Their affair, born in secrecy and deceit, couldn't survive the harsh light of exposure. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly. Olivia didn't contest the terms, likely out of shame or exhaustion. By the end of the month, their marriage was dissolved. Ben moved into a new apartment, smaller and simpler than the home they had shared. It was a blank slate, a fresh start. In the weeks that followed, Ben focused on rebuilding his life. He reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies he had neglected, and started therapy to process the betrayal. Each step felt like reclaiming a part of himself that had been lost during his marriage. He wasn't just surviving, he was healing. One afternoon, as he sorted through a box of old photos, he came across a picture of him and Olivia on their wedding day. They looked so young, so hopeful. Ben stared at the photo for a long time before placing it back in the box. He didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet sadness for what had been and what could never be again. Months later, Ben stood on the balcony of his new apartment watching the sun dip below the horizon. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Melissa. "Hey, a few of us are grabbing drinks tonight. You should join." Ben hesitated, then smiled. For the first time in years, the idea of going out, meeting people, and embracing life felt exciting instead of daunting. "Count me in," he replied. As he locked the door and headed out, Ben felt lighter, freer. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving behind scars, yes, but also resilience. He was no longer the man who had been blindsided by a hotel charge. He was someone stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next.